Everyone. I'm Michael Bronstein, president of the American Trade Association for Cannabis and Hemp, and welcome to our webinar on what is next for rescheduling. The American Trade Association for Cannabis and Hemp was founded 11 years ago now, and sits at the critical intersection of federal and state work, bringing real-world experience, deep industry understanding to the table. We work closely with lawmakers to shape policies that are actionable and built to stand the test of time for both the cannabis and hemp industry. And I'm really excited today to talk about what is next for rescheduling, as so many of you have reached out to us to discuss this. ATACH founded the Coalition for Cannabis Scheduling Reform about 3 years ago, where it was an ATACH-led campaign, is an ATACH-led campaign, where we've marshaled resources to be able to help the rescheduling effort, which ultimately led to an executive order from President Trump just a short time ago. And many have asked, what is next for this? Today, I am here with two distinguished guests, including Shane Pennington, who's a partner at Blank Rome, and many of you know as a leading expert on cannabis rescheduling and drug policy in general, as well as administrative procedure around it. And Dr. Priyanka Sharma, who's the co-CEO of Casmira. And Casmira Casmira Therapeutics is the only personalized CBD therapy care platform for humans and pets using an in-house 503A compounding pharmacy. And Dr. Sharma comes from a chemical engineering background. He's a key scientific and regulatory thought leader on cannabinoid regulations. Was intimately involved with Colorado's task group rolling it out. We're excited to have her back here on a webinar to talk about rescheduling. So I think the first, I'd like to open it up with Priyanka and ask, with this rescheduling and with the EO, what does the EO in your estimation mean for CBD?
Thank you, Michael. So first of all, Happy New Year, everyone. It's definitely going to be an extremely exciting year for our industry. So I was asked to talk about the executive order as it relates to CBD, because there were mention of CBD several times in the executive order. So overall, what this executive order does is it treats CBD as something that we've known for a long time, which is it's medically relevant. It's also research worthy. There were some points in the executive order that pointed out that CBD is also not properly tested. Hemp-derived cannabinoid products are also underregulated, and they're in need of evidence-based clinical frameworks. So let's talk about what this executive order does and doesn't do for CBD. So it doesn't legalize CBD in any way. It also doesn't automatically move it into a reimbursement pathway in the healthcare industry. But what it does do is it formally moves cannabidiol outside of where it is today, which is a gray zone as far as regulatory distribution, and into a medical research and a regulatory pipeline at the federal level. CBD is being explicitly recognized as a medical priority in this executive order. It's being repositioned as closer to medical treatment pathways and further away from the ambiguity that it stands in today from a business standpoint and also from a consumer standpoint. One of the central policy goals of this executive order is to expand CBD research. And this is fundamental and foundational towards clinical legitimacy, which underscores one of the points of this executive order. There's also an acknowledgement of the legal instability that hemp-derived cannabinoid products are about to face come November. And there's an acknowledgement that this could be placed on some sort of federal policy agenda as an issue that needs to be discussed between stakeholders. But overall, it positions CBD for a agency style oversight for future rulemaking, research coordination, and legislative clarity. I think one of the most important parts of the executive order was the call to action towards the end for CBD, which was calling for agency collaboration to develop research methods and using real world evidence to improve access to hemp derived cannabinoid products, as well as informing standards of care. So, some of the agencies that were mentioned in this call to action are HHS, they mentioned FDA, they mentioned CMMS, and NIH. So, just starting with the call to action on developing research methods. So, these agencies will need to start with a clinical question that they're trying to solve on CBD. They may choose to apply a research method like a randomized control trial. They may choose to do a longitudinal observational study, but overall, they're trying to explore the patient experience with CBD. They can do this in a qualitative method. They can look at interviews and also anecdotal evidence from patients, but they can also do quantitative analysis. So they can use different statistical analysis methods. And the point of that is to understand for different patient populations that are accessing hemp derived cannabinoid products, they're reporting positive outcomes. But what does that mean from a real world evidence standpoint? And how do you move that into clinical frameworks that healthcare professionals can actually understand and apply in their clinical decision making? There was a key point here on the EO about informing standards of care. And this is going to be critical if we are to see a pilot program through CMMI where healthcare professionals are going to be allowed to recommend certain CBD products. Medicare patients are sometimes a complex patient population, and developing these research methods, having this agency collaboration is going to be critical to help these healthcare professionals understand how to manage these complex patients that will be taking hemp derived cannabinoid products. How long do they need to be taking them for? How long are they recommending them for? What are the other drugs that these patients are on? And how do we inform these healthcare professionals and arm them with the tools that they need to understand how to use hemp derived cannabinoids as a therapeutic tool? So, overall, this executive order, like I said, again, it's such an exciting time for our industry because it just underscores that CBD is medicine and we should be studying it as such and we should be treating it as such. And I think this will expand a network of stakeholders that will ultimately serve to create the safest product for the patient.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to remind folks, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box that is at the bottom of your screen, and we will be getting to hopefully a lot of the Q&As and your questions that we'll be able to ask the speakers here about anything that you have in terms of questions about what's next for rescheduling and what we're anticipating. Shane, I'd like to bring the conversation to you and ask really, what does this EO mean? When you look at it, how do you see this? How do you see this going forward? And I think of particular interest too is how do you see the steps that are playing out in the EO? What are you looking for? What is it that you're recognizing in this process? To know that this is being advanced forward.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for everybody who's joined. I've seen some good questions. Michael, you should check the questions that have already been asked. There's one that is asking about you personally, so you should take a look at that. Yeah, the EO is really significant. We now have presidents from 2 administrations that have backed cannabis rescheduling. The executive order recognizes the evidence on currently accepted medical use. It calls out the key decision makers within the executive branch and directs them from the White House to take certain steps. The most significant of which for rescheduling is to, as expeditiously as possible, consistent with federal law, including 21 USC 811A, complete the process for transferring marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. that directive was given to the Attorney General, which is significant because it was the Attorney General that proposed the rescheduling rule in the first place. Um, and the Attorney General is being directed to complete that process. What am I expecting? I mean, if they want to do it as expeditiously as possible, I've spoken publicly about this many, many times, and my answer is still the same. I would expect that because we have a pending ALJ hearing, which is stalled because of an interlocutory appeal, and in particular, it's stalled because DEA hasn't set the briefing schedule for that interlocutory appeal. So to be clear for people, if the ALJ before he retired directed DEA to set a briefing schedule to consider the issues in the interlocutory appeal, which all centered around the Biden administration's DEA colluding with the prohibitionist side in the proceedings. DEA was supposed to set the briefing schedule. And that's how the process starts. I can't set the briefing schedule. DEA can only do that. And DEA has not done that. We just saw their most recent 90-day notice that they had to file every 90 days saying what the status of the situation is. And every time they've said there's a pending interlocutory appeal, we have not set the briefing schedule. So that's why we are where we are. In order to get out of that situation and to move cannabis to Schedule 3, it's fairly simple. The Attorney General would need to cancel or withdraw the ALJ hearing, give reasons for why that's happening. Because under the Administrative Procedure Act, agencies have to give reasoned explanations for the steps that they take, among other procedural requirements. Here, they would need to say, why are we canceling it? I can get into why they might do that there are plenty of good reasons to do that. But once they've done that, that would moot the interlocutory appeal, because the interlocutory appeal is about how that hearing should go. And if the hearing is not going to proceed because it's been canceled or withdrawn, the issues underlying the interlocutory appeal become moot. They're non-issues. So cancel the hearing or withdraw it, give reasons. That moots the interlocutory appeal, then issue a final rule. And to be clear, while these steps do, ideally need to be in that sequence, the DOJ could be working on them in tandem, right? You can be writing the final rule while someone else is writing the piece about canceling the hearing. What I would be looking for, things I'm looking for is DOJ going to acknowledge the executive order in some sort of a way, some sort of a press release or some sort of informal agency document saying this executive order has come down, DOJ is working on this. I mean, that is something that does happen sometimes, and it would give us some insight. The second thing I would be looking for is a notice in the Federal Register saying we're withdrawing, canceling the ALJ hearing, and giving the reasons that I said. They could go different routes, and the way we would know that that's happening is there would be something in the Federal Register. Like if you want to know what I do, you can go to regulations.gov and go to DEA's page on regulations.gov and subscribe to all of their Federal Register notices and subscribe to DOJ's Federal Register notices. You'll get the equivalent of if you have a Google alert for your name or for your kids' names or whatever you might have, some brand that you're interested in, whatever it is, your football team. And you get those emails that tell you, oh, here's what happened in the news today with that thing you're interested in. That's what you're going to get if you subscribe. It's going to be a lot. Okay. So you'll have to rifle through it like I do every day to see if there's anything of interest. I also have a Google alert on marijuana spelled a million different ways and cannabis spelled a million different ways with DEA and DOJ. That's how I get my news. Okay. So if you want to know what I know publicly, that's how you do it. And that's what I'm monitoring and watching. And as far as steps forward from there, just to round this out, once we have a final rule, it very likely will say that it goes into effect 30 days from the date that it's published in the Federal Register. Okay. That's an APA general rule. It can be, there are exceptions to it. I don't expect those exceptions to be in play here. I expect there will be a 30-day delay. During that same 30-day period, any person or company or entity that thinks that they're aggrieved or injured or harmed by that final rule can seek judicial review in the DC Circuit or any federal court of appeals where they're at home. That's in the statute, 21 USC 877, if you want to look it up and read the exact words. The upshot is, if it's a final rule moving it to Schedule 3, I would anticipate that people who are upset about that will sue, probably immediately, in one of the federal appellate courts. When they do, I would also anticipate that they will seek a stay of the effective date of the final rule. That means that litigation will kick off, and that early litigation over the stay will be very important. Obviously, we don't want the effective date of the final rule to be stayed. And obviously, we don't want any party opposed to Schedule 3 to prevail in that litigation. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff going on behind the scenes, rest assured, to be prepared for that. But I would anticipate that litigation could take anywhere from a year and a half to 2 years. And once we have that settled, we will once and for all have a final effective Schedule 3 rule. To be clear, as long as the stay motion is denied, it will become effective 30 days from the date that hits in the Federal Register. The final rule hits in the Federal Register, 30 days, you have Schedule 3. The only thing that could stop it then would be a new rule, lawsuit overturns it, Congress decides to do something different, God intervenes, something like that. And so that's kind of the lay of the land from here to the glory land.
That's a great explanation, because I think that there's been a lot of discussion, certainly in public, and speculation as to what the process is. I think there's also, a lot of question around timeline, right? So we're saying, okay, well, it's got to be, it's got to be with speed and with force that we've seen in the EO. What does that mean in practice, do you think? Might be on mute, Shane.
Whoops-a-daisy. If you're the Attorney General and you are directed to get this done, you have to write the documents that I just described. So let's start with the final rule. When you write the final rule, under the APA, you have to respond to significant public comments. Do you remember the public comment period back when? There were 43,000 public comments. They were overwhelmingly supportive of the proposed rule to move cannabis to Schedule 3. There were, however, some negative comments. And there were some that were kind of, I like this, but, sort of, you had everything under the sun in those 43,000. So you have to take that 43,000, many of which were just repetitive, some of which were just people with an axe to grind saying things that aren't really relevant to the rulemaking, just letting their voices be heard, which is part of it. But there's some subset of those that are significant, and this is important. If a comment is significant under the law, then DOJ has to respond to it in the final rule, okay? How do you tell a significant comment from an insignificant one? Well, the legal rule is, if we took the premises of the comment as true, and we assume those are true, would that comment require a change to the final rule? That's the line. So imagine you are the Attorney General and you have now 43,000 comments in front of you. The first thing you have to do is get to the bottom of that. Now, they're going to use AI tools to get rid of repetition. They're going to do a lot of things. But at the end of the day, somebody has to roll up their sleeves and read those things, okay? They have to identify and apply that test to see which ones are significant. Then they have to formulate responses to those, okay? That takes time. In addition to that, you actually have to write the final rule. So you have to say, you write a document. Usually these are pretty long documents. They're 50 pages, 80 pages. Matt Zorn once wrote a Substack post that explained he could do it in 2 pages, which I think it could be done that fast. And there's everything in between 2 and 80 or 100, right? The HHS analysis was 252 pages. So depending on where they fall on that spectrum, they have to write this very significant historic document. They have to respond to 43,000 comments, really probably only, 100 many of which are going to fall into groups, right? So there will be 10 about this and 10 about that. And you can knock them all down in one response if you do it well, but it takes time, is what I'm saying. So let's say that this is delegated to, instead of Attorney General Bondi, it's delegated to someone in DOJ who's capable, but not her. It then has to go through a clearance process in DOJ to get its sign off from the Attorney General, which means there has to be review internally. Then it has to go through an interagency review process, and the White House surely will want to look at it. So people need to understand that's a lot of human beings looking at this very sensitive thing for the first time, seeing all the comments. Probably many of these people have not, waded through those comments. They're going to have to see the answers. There could be editing. Anyone who's worked on a long document, like a brief or an important letter to Congress or whatever, it takes time, even if you're doing it expeditiously. And part of expeditiously here is consistent with federal law. And what you should read that to mean is something that will stand up to judicial review. It's not good enough that you think it's consistent with federal law. You have to be thinking about there's litigation coming. So they're going to be careful. And the reason I say all of this is not to be a cold shower and make people think it can't be done quickly. It can be done relatively quickly. How quickly depends on the second thing I want to talk about, which is when did they start? Have they started? They could have started a long time ago, right? Like the administration has been aware of this issue for a long time. There's a lot of speculation out there that they may have thought about this before very seriously. It's entirely possible that at some stage they actually started drafting something along these lines or started that review process. Maybe they've got it well in hand and they're far down the road already. If so, that accelerates the timeline. But because nobody knows that except people in DOJ, we can't be sure. So the way that I look at this is, I think conservatively, we should know something within a month or two, about where this is going. The longer we go, by the way, so say that we get to February 15th and we haven't seen anything about this. People will be freaking out. There will be all the weeping and gnashing of teeth about this is supposed to be expeditious, right? And they'll be very upset, understandably. I will be very grateful because from my perspective, that will show that they are being very careful and working on a final rule instead of doing something else, right? So there are other things they could do that could complicate the process that we don't want them to do. And those steps would happen faster, okay? So say that they wanted to do something like start over, which would be, I'm not saying they're going to, I'm saying they could. If they were to do that, they would presumably do it. That's much simpler. It doesn't require internal review. You just start the process over. They could dump that in the Federal Register tomorrow easily, if that's their decision. If you get to mid-February, and they haven't done that, I will read that as, okay, we have a final rule that's in the oven, at least. And I would expect it to be done sometime around then. End of February would be where I'd start to be like, okay, where is this thing? From my perspective. And I understand that that's not what everybody wants. Everybody wants it now. But the reasons I just said are the reasons that it could take that long. And I'm being conservative here. It could be faster. But conservatively, that's my current thinking.
So it seems like the EO, I'd ask this as a follow-up with what you were just saying. It seems like the EO also, hewed closely to, what the process was before, right? And what the rule was before. So what is your assumption here? Does the rule have to be the same as what we already know? What do you see in terms of that, in terms of that? Is that something that figures into your thinking?
Very much. So rules can change. So from a proposed rule to a final rule, let me back up. In administrative law, you have agency actions. That's how you think about it. There's an agency action. A rulemaking starts with a proposed rule. You have notice and comment. Sometimes you have a hearing and you have a final rule. Okay. That's the life cycle of that agency action, followed by litigation. When you start one, that's the agency action. If you want to do a different agency action, you have to start over. Now, the whole point of notice and comment, though, is to improve the proposed rule and get a final rule that's better than what you proposed. Inherent in that is the assumption and the acknowledgement that it could change some, right? Somebody could come up with something that they didn't know or didn't think about, present new data, whatever. And the agency could say, that's a fair point. We should change this deadline from here to here because people need more time for that. Or, you're right. The way that we looked at that particular piece of this was a little off. We're going to adjust it. What they can't do is change it in such a way that that people no longer had notice from the proposed rule of what they were commenting on. Okay, so you can't just drop some entirely new thing that no one had a chance to comment on into the final rule. This is a often litigated issue because where the line is, it's a fuzzy. And anytime there's a fuzzy line, lawyers will argue about it. The point for our purposes is it can't look like some stranger to us, to put it in simple terms. It has to be close to that proposed rule. They can change it at the margins, but if they were to do something too much, then it would make it vulnerable on judicial review. So it has to be, within a margin of what they proposed. And that's what I would expect. And I'd like to emphasize something that you said, Michael. It's clear that they're looking at this agency action that started October 6, 2022 and moved forward from there with the proposed rule and so forth. That's what they're looking at because they said complete that process. And they introduced the entire thing by going over the very important history of that process. So from the language of the EO, I think it's a reasonable inference that they are thinking about completing this administrative process, which is why I think I'm starting my thinking about, okay, well, what's the fastest way to complete that process? Well, cancel the hearing, issue a final rule, and out. That's the fastest way.
There's some great questions. I just want to say from folks here too. I'm gonna get to as many as we can, just because of the quality of what folks are asking here too. Shane, it seems like just along the lines of what you were talking about, a questioner was asking, what about the 60-day congressional review because it's a major rule. Does the Congressional Review Act, does any of this play into this timing?
So whether it's a major rule is a debatable proposition. I won't get into it because if you think what I just did was a law school lecture, believe me, if I were to explain all the details of whether it qualifies for Congressional Review Act, it would take the rest of the time of this call and it would bore everyone to tears. What I will say, and what I think should be a good shorthand for people, is DEA has something called an Orange Book that you can look up. You could Google DEA Orange Book. If you look at it, it'll give you a list of every scheduling action in the history of the Controlled Substances Act with Federal Register sites. So you can then look at every single one of them, which I have, and you can, for yourself, see, well, when did it go into effect? Was there a Congressional Review Act delayed? Has that ever been mentioned? Was it mentioned in the proposed rule? The answer is no to all of those questions. It's never delayed it. I'm not aware of a single one that's ever had that as a delay. They go into effect the date that they say in the proposed rule, in the final rule, which is usually 30 days after it's published. There are exceptions for not that puts you in Congressional Review Act territory, but there are other ways they can do scheduling. There are like different ways that aren't applicable here. But for ours, there's not a single example of one ever being delayed because of the Congressional Review Act that I'm aware of. So that to me should give you a strong indication. And I will also say that my own analysis of the Congressional Review Act, the part that I'm leaving out that is very detailed, leads me to believe that there will not be a delay for the Congressional Review Act. And that's based on hardcore legal analysis that I'm not going to go through here. But when those two things align, when you have a long history of precedent that all points in one direction, plus you have analysis that leads you to that same conclusion, that's where I stand. I don't expect that to delay things.
Questioner asks, what's the likelihood What's the likelihood of a stay? I mean, obviously we are preparing as ATACH to make sure that there is no stay. And we are, marshaling resources and doing the things that we can do. But folks are interested to hear what you think about potential likelihood, in that scenario.
Right. So I put the chances of a stay at, again, being conservative from our perspective, like, worst version of these numbers, reasonable version. I put it at 10% or less. In reality, in my heart, in my own mind, when I'm not talking to people who I know, I don't want to say something that's too much one way or the other, but my own actual view is it's more like 5 to 7%. I don't think it's likely. The reason is, first of all, stays are exceptional. It's an exceptional form of relief. It's not the norm. Just that's the starting point. Second thing is, to get a stay, a party would have to have standing. They would have to be able to show that they have a right to be in federal court at all. And it's not clear that any of the prohibitionist parties or anyone who might be attacking it from the other side, sort of a deschedule or bust sort of frame of mind, which I'm much more sympathetic to, but nonetheless disagree with, right? Those folks, any of them, have actual standing as a legal matter to even be there in court saying that. Okay, that's the first thing. Standing is difficult. People who are familiar with it understand that it's no small hurdle. It's serious. If you've ever litigated in federal court, you know that. Third, the standing standard, the test for, not standing, the test for whether a stay is appropriate or not is a multi-factor balancing test. But two things that really are important and difficult to show in general, the reason it's rare is because you have to show irreparable harm, which is, so whoever does this, they don't just have to show that they have an injury for Article 3 purposes for standing. They also have to make the additional showing that not having a stay would cause them irreparable injury. And that's a very high standard. The second one that they have to show is a likelihood of success on the merits. And I want to tell everybody right now, I am not going to break down why I think there's not a high likelihood of success on the merits, because I don't want to preview litigation strategy. Because surely if I, listen, when Sam has these webinars, yes, Sam, I know you're listening and I am too, right? We all know that. So I'm not going to lay it out, but suffice to say, my firm conclusion is that they do not have a likelihood of success on the merits. In addition to that, there are other factors that are also in play. The point is, that's a lot of barriers that they have to get over, very serious ones. I'm not sure they can get over any of them. And when you stack them all up, so now they have 3 Mount Everests to climb, I don't see it. And the last thing I would say is just to pause for a minute, and I don't want to get people overexcited or anything, but we gotta acknowledge this sometimes. We've never been in this position before as a movement. This will be the first time Sam's on the wrong side of an agency action that I'm aware of ever. They are constantly defending the prohibition stance, which has been basically in place, unassailed, for a long, not that people haven't tried, but they've always been defending the Hill. And the Hill is a hill where the federal government has taken action, and you're the one trying to say they're wrong. There's a lot of deference to the federal government. There's a lot of momentum in what the federal government's doing, that courts, it's hard to get a court to intervene and tell another branch of the government that they have to go redo their homework. It's big. Now the tables have turned for us. We are going to be defending the Hill. Sam's at the bottom of 3 Mount Everest trying to climb up. And we should just all pause for a minute and realize I know it's been a long time coming, but as a lawyer, I can tell you that feels amazing. And so they're at the bottom of that 3 Mount Everests. I don't think they can get over them. That's why I don't think that a stay is likely. One last thing about this. DOJ will be in there. It will be Sam or whoever it is versus DOJ in the lawsuit. The only way to get your voice heard or anybody else's voice heard in that litigation is to either intervene or participate as an amicus curiae, okay, a friend of the court. If you intervene, you would be intervening on the side of DOJ. See the point I just made about how we're suddenly on DOJ's side? Like, so amazing. Okay. And those are the ways that you get involved. And because this stay is so important, and because the litigation is so important, the one thing that we can do as a movement, as an industry, to make sure that we get this right is to do things that are going to help the cause in that litigation. It means getting in there as an intervener, getting in there as an amicus curiae, not just to get in and be like, hey, look at us, but to get in and win. And so we need to have the best legal strategy. It needs to be coordinated. We've got to treat this like an existential war, okay? Because it is. So, and if we do that and we marshal our resources and work together, then I think we have a good chance of prevailing in the end.
And we're obviously committed to that here at ATACH, and at the coalition as well, with an incredible amount of partners on that. So we will absolutely be embarking on that path, and have already started that process. Priyanka, there've been a lot of really good questions that have come in here, and I'd like to get to a few that have been asked for you. One of them is, how do you inform standards of care? So the EO obviously goes into a good amount of detail, but in your view, how do you inform standards of care under this that be able to help the CBD conversation move forward? And what do you see as some of the roadblocks that could potentially be removed in a real world way? I mean, you've been having to deal with what government law is, and operating in that environment. I think people are interested in a real world perspective as to what that means.
Yeah, and I think this is where something like the CMMI pilot, which we should potentially see some framework of that, is going to help remove the issue that there isn't a baseline fundamental knowledge that healthcare professionals have been armed with as it relates to cannabinoids and cannabinoid care in a medical perspective. So we need to inform the stakeholders how to deal with patients that are taking cannabinoids for a therapeutic benefit. And that's going to start with these agencies collaborating as a research collaboration, trying to solve these clinical questions. Something like the CMMI pilot that will give rise to clinical decision frameworks and a lot of needed conversations within the healthcare community that should be able to help move this conversation forward at a federal level.
I think it's a really it's a really good point. And I think that, seeing from sort of the level of questions as to kind of like what the real world impact is on this, it seems to be a lot of folks are asking about what that impact is, which I think is great. And obviously we have a really historic executive order and a really exciting opportunity here on this. One questioner has asked or has said that the greatest need for research is on THC and CBD, and potentially some of the combinations of cannabinoids that you're seeing out there in terms of outcome. The question is this going to be easier to do, this type of research? Will this be easier to do on rescheduling and what we've seen after the EO? And I would also sort of add, what excites you about the potential of that possibility as well, if that is
So
the case.
the question falling on CBD, if something at the federal level occurs on rescheduling, does that make it easier for something like CBD and THC? Yes, for research, right? So, of course, there's so many healthcare professionals that are talking about their patients reporting positive outcomes from using products that have both CBD and THC. And today, they're available at a recreational level, but a move to Schedule 3, I think, will allow the healthcare community to be able to view this like other controlled substances that are in the category of Schedule 3, they'll be able to look at how these products could interact with other drugs that their patients are taking, and they could lean on the perspective that they already have from other Schedule III drugs, and use that to inform potential outcomes. And I see this being important for those combination or ratio products.
If I
It's
could,
very, yeah, go ahead, please.
if I could add to that, uh, Priyanka's answer was exactly right, and I feel like what I'm going to say is kind of uh, light compared to it, but I think it's important. The president called out a need for research, and the federal government has put its money where its mouth is on this by starting the research itself by committing to this pilot program. So we don't have to wonder if this is going to move research forward. It will. But if you needed more proof, removing the 280E tax penalty from the industry will mean that there's much more cash in the industry to support research where it's needed, to coordinate with people on research. It will also mean from the outside, investors who see, oh my gosh, the president of the United States and the leading federal health agencies are interested in this. Maybe I should invest in that research. The impact of this should not be underestimated. The federal government has very, very rarely, they've done a lot of research on cannabis, but it's all been how bad is it? Does it hurt people? Do people drive recklessly? What does it do to pregnant women? What does it do to kids? How bad is it? Oh, it's so bad. We've gathered all this data for decades. For the first time, you see an executive order from the White House that says this stuff actually has utility. We should be researching it. That you don't need to wonder about this. There will be more research. And part, again, of how much and how accelerated and how significant it is how much do we count on this opportunity out there on our side of the private sector side of this world. We should really mobilize on it and try to coordinate it to our benefit.
I think it's a really exciting time on this. And one of the things that, I keep thinking about, through our conversation today, and as we're drawing to a close here on this webinar, is that the thing that is so historic and is really to some extent, and I've said this in other places as well, it was almost unimaginable, is that a generation of advocates, a generation of researchers, a generation of patients, and indeed our movement has said that marijuana can be medicine. And what we've seen here is now the federal government finally acknowledging this fact that all of us know and have known for years outside of it, based on the work, the research, the advocacy, some of the outcomes that we've seen. And that I don't think should be lost in this moment and the history that is being made and that we're helping effectuate right before our eyes here. So I'd like to thank you too for the work that you're doing, and also for the really substantive conversation that was had today, as well as the questions that came in from folks that were extremely detailed and were very interesting, that we answered here. We obviously tried to get it to as much as possible. We'll obviously be doing more programming on this, and we can also update folks via email. Recording of this webinar will be available afterwards. We will indeed send it out to the participants here, so you will have a copy of that. And if you want to keep up to date, definitely follow us at attach.org and also at schedulingreform.org, which we will also be updating shortly at the coalition, as we continue to advocate and plan next steps on industry behalf. And if there are any other questions that you have, please feel free to email us at info@attach.org. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And we look forward to staying in touch as we follow along what's next for rescheduling.